Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sacker. Since Vladimir Putin launched his all-out invasion of Ukraine, he's put a tighter squeeze on Russian civil society. Criticism of the war risks years in prison. Independent media voices have been silenced, and new punishments have been piled on Putin's most prominent political opponent, Alexei Navalny. My guest is Maria Pevчих, investigations chief for Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation, which is now outlawed in Russia. Where does Russia's anti-Putin movement go from here? Maria Pevчих, welcome to Hard Talk.
Hello.
Right now, it seems Vladimir Putin is intent on crushing all forms of dissent, of opposition inside Russia. Do you fear that he's succeeding?
He's succeeding for now. He's definitely quite good at imposing this fear, you know, a complete fear that goes everywhere, that the fear that you cannot hide from. But I don't think that this is a sustainable strategy to do what he's doing at the moment. The opposition moods aren't going to just disappear if you hide everybody in prison. People are still going to think what they think. And I guess so eventually this crackdown will actually backfire on Vladimir Putin.
But fear is a very powerful emotion to instill in a population. And of course, part of that fear is based on messaging about what happens if you cross red lines. And nobody sort of better symbolizes what happens if you cross red lines than your colleague, Alexei Navalny. Now, you've worked with him for a decade or more in the Anti-Corruption Foundation in Russia. He right now is languishing in a top security prison in solitary confinement. Just begin by telling me what you can of his current condition.
Absolutely. So today he was released from the solitary confinement. It's called a standard housing unit. Essentially it's a punishment cell. You're there on your own. It's tiny, 2 meters by 3 meters. And you go there if you've done something wrong. So he was released this morning, and then within 5 minutes he was re-sentenced to additional 15 days there. So he was only out for a couple of minutes. And for the following 2 weeks he will be there again in that little cell where all you do for the whole day is just sit on a stool. You are allowed to read only 1 book per term. You're allowed to use paper and a pen for 1 hour a day, and that's it. You just sit and stare at the wall. You're not even allowed to lay down, to use the bed, because the bed is being chained up to the wall at 6 a.m. and it's only being chained down at the end of the day.
It's extraordinary to imagine living that life in that cell. Does he get any exercise? Is he allowed out at any point during the day?
Well, he is allowed a walk, and a walk is cell next to a cell where he's set, but that one doesn't have a ceiling. So you are still among the 4 walls. You still don't really get to see anything apart from this little tiny patch of sky above you, and that's the walk, that's the exercise. So that's how it works.
How does he get messages out? Because I follow him on Twitter, so do millions of other people.
Everybody should.
and those messages emerge, but he clearly doesn't have any access to communications or a phone. So who is writing these messages?
He's writing those messages, but he hand writes them, and he passes them on through his lawyers, and then we just type them up. So we would never write anything instead of him. His social media is still entirely managed by himself. He is allowed to write letters, and he uses this allowance. He uses this hour a day that he has to write those Instagram and Twitter.
Why do you think they let him do it?
It's a rhetorical question. We don't know. Now they do, tomorrow they won't. So, so far, let's just be grateful that he can do it now, because that can stop any minute.
He seems very angry with the European Union, with the Americans as well, about what he sees as a failure to be serious about imposing tough sanctions on hundreds, no, thousands of oligarchs, the richest Russians, who surround and, he would say, aid and abet Putin and his associates in the Kremlin. Is he angry?
I think he is. Annoyed, angry, I'm not sure what the right word is. And I share these emotions because we've been talking about sanctions, about sanctioning oligarchs and those people close to Putin's regime for years. And the level of sanctions that we see today, which is pretty good, like these are decent sanctions, the current packages. But let's be honest, they should have been imposed so long before.
But this list of 6,000 that the Anti-Corruption Foundation has come up with, and you know, the very loaded term, oligarchs, bribe takers and warmongers, you say, these 6,000. You tell me, what proportion of those 6,000 are currently under sanctions in the West? Oh,
a tiny proportion. I can tell you from the richest people in Russia, from 200 richest people in Russia, oligarchs, businessmen, etc., only 46 were sanctioned. And that is exactly the problem, and this is why we're being upset, because the proportion is not good. There is no imminence to those sanctions. You know, 46 to 200, that is still a good chance to get away. And this is exactly what we are lobbying for. We're saying that there shouldn't be a way to get away from those sanctions, and they should just be imposed regularly and strictly. And if you work for Putin's regime, there shouldn't be a way, you know, to kind of sway a little bit and find your way out. You will be punished for that.
The more you push this message that there are oligarchs around Putin who are currently escaping from sanctions and that you want the West to act on it, the more you push that message, the more likely it is that those holding Navalny right now will intensify the level of pain and punishment inflicted upon him.
There is some logic to that, but I don't like that logic, because following that, it means that we just need to lay low, do nothing, and just be quiet so they don't do something bad to Navalny or to other political prisoners, and there are plenty of those. This is not how we work. We respond by applying even more pressure on them, and I think that's the only way to go. That's the only way to show Putin that imprisoning Navalny is not going to solve anything. We are actually investigating and publishing more stories now than we did when Alexei was around. And it is a matter of principle for me personally, just to show them, look, your plan didn't work. You've thrown him into prison. We are making more investigations about you. You are torturing him in prison, and we're getting your Vladimir Putin's yacht arrested in Italy. And that's the way I like to operate.
But it was plain after you made a big, high-profile pronouncement about this yacht, Shehirezada, which is held in Italy, and which, after your revelations, the yacht was impounded by the Italians. And we then saw the conditions worsen for Navalny. So I come back to the very personal point. Do you not have any difficulty with that?
I might have difficulty with that, but I have put this difficulty on a faraway shelf, and I try not to think about it, because I have a very clear instruction from Alexei Navalny himself, what to do, how to work. He wants us to continue working, and the worst thing that we can do is kind of change and wobble and do something differently. We have to be persistent. It's a long fight, and no one is going to give it up halfway through.
I guess I'm really struck by how much risk you are prepared to take. If we go back a little bit in the Navalny story and your involvement with it, he, of course, was poisoned inside Russia. Miraculously, he survived. He recuperated in Germany, and he went back to Russia. But it became clear during your investigations that you had a trail which led you, it seems, to the people who perpetrated the poisoning. And you agreed to work with documentary makers,
yes.
you and others, to try and tell this story. Mm-hmm. Why did you believe it was important to go so very public, even to the point of you and Navalny making a call to the agent who appears to have placed the poisoned underpants in Navalny's room, which had the Novichok on them? Yeah. Why did you decide it was so important to go public with all of that when you must have known that would simply make you a personal target for Russian intelligence?
Well, because there are things that are bigger than me in this life. And this story, the story about this poisoning, the story about the fact that Vladimir Putin uses chemical weapons, just think about it for a second, chemical weapons that are forbidden, they shouldn't exist, but he uses them against his opponents, his like personal enemies. That story is so embarrassing for Putin. This is something that will stay with Putin forever. This is something that hopefully one day he will be prosecuted for. And I would love to be the part of that process because, well, I've been witness to that. I think that this is a very scary and dangerous crime that he's committing with this chemical weapons poisonings and this whole system that he runs of this, you know, operations. That just needs to be stopped. And we made this big film that is available on BBC iPlayer.
But I mean, here we sit in London, and you clearly are a person who lives in exile, but you are very well aware of the names of Litvinenko, yes. of Skripal. Yes. You know the reach of the Russian secret services is long. You have a target on your back.
Perhaps.
I don't think there's any doubt about it, is there? How do you, those close to you, live with that?
It's not that difficult to live with. Sometimes you just, you know, there are situations in your life when you're scared, objectively dangerous situations. But in those situations, you can make a choice to not be scared. It's a very deliberate, very rational and cold-hearted choice in a dangerous situation to not be scared.
Personal issues are one thing. There's also the more collective issue. Recently, the Guardian newspaper reported on a former Navalny staffer, somebody that presumably worked alongside you, a young man, Mikhail Sokolov, who says that he first volunteered for Navalny in 2017. He was then approached by the FSB and was paid to be an informer inside your organization. Do you fear that the reach of Russia's secret services does actually go inside the Anti-Corruption Foundation?
We assume it does, and we act in a way that anything we say inside the office or in any work environment can be leaked, can be published, and we behave accordingly. We have no secrets to hide. We aren't doing anything that we would be concerned doing publicly. So that's the only way to live your life in this sort of situation. So yes, probably we are targets of some sort of, you know, strange people running around Europe undercover, not cover illegals, you know, this sort of the secret services branch. But what can you do about it? You just have to be reasonably careful. And yeah, that's all.
Pretty much all independent media now has been shut down inside Russia. So you don't have that outlet for your work. So how do you reach the Russian people right now?
Through YouTube. Our channels haven't changed. So there is a big YouTube channel that we use to publish investigations. So this is, for example, when people could have seen Putin's palace, our biggest investigation. So we use the same channel where before that Alexei Navalny was the presenter, and now instead of Navalny, it's just me and my other colleagues, and we do very similar investigations. And they are watched by the same amount of people.
Are they really, though? I
Yes,
mean,
yes.
inside Russia today, let us be realistic about
absolutely.
what happens. It is a surveillance society. Russia is a society which we, at the very beginning of this conversation, discussed is gripped by fear right now. Do you think Russians, given that your organization is outlawed inside the country, defined as an extremist organization, do you think Russians feel comfortable viewing materials that you put up on YouTube, even if they're lucky enough to be able to get around all of the different internet censorship which the Russian administration tries to impose?
YouTube is still fully accessible in Russia for unknown to me reasons, but it is. And Russian people have a good experience with samizdat and other Soviet, sort of techniques of overcoming this thing. So yes, our numbers have not changed. So there is definitely the same level of interest to our work, to investigations, and we are very happy about it.
What seems to be part of Navalny's plan, maybe your plan too, is to put so much pressure on the Russian elite, the oligarchs, the people around Putin, that you basically foment splits and disruption within the inner circle. But I've spoken to many other people well versed in how Russia under Putin works who say this is completely unrealistic. The oligarchs are not close to Putin. He's basically done a deal with them. They stay out of politics. They're free to make money, but they are not in politics, and they are not in a position to move against or launch some sort of palace coup against Vladimir Putin. Is it naive to think that might happen?
I don't think it's naive, and I don't think that the assessments that you just spoke to, I don't think that this is entirely correct. We don't really know, because now the sanctions against oligarchs aren't imminent, and there are still people who can get away and who can think that, oh, maybe I can wait on this side and nothing will happen to me. I think that those oligarchs are very crucial to Putin's regime. And if you
Really? Because I spoke to Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who of course used to be one of the uber oligarchs not so very long ago in Russia. He said it's completely unrealistic to expect that kind of putsch coming from the elite, from the oligarchs against Putin. And the FT just reported the other day, there is little sign that sanctions have pressured the oligarchs into contemplating a palace coup. Instead, they are scrambling for ways to cling on to their wealth. Many are now resigned to a life inside Russia.
But if they don't work, why is Usmanov and Avin, there was an article today about them going through Hungary, asking the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban to cross them off the list of the European sanctions. So if sanctions aren't effective, why is that happening?
I need to interject just to make clear that all the individuals you've named deny that they are oligarchs involved in propping up Putin or supporting a war or anything else. So let's just be clear about that, because it's important to get that on the record. I just wonder if we change the perspective from thinking about the oligarch to thinking about the Russian people. Are you and Alexei Navalny, are you disappointed in the Russian people, that the Russian people haven't, in the last 6 months, taken to the streets? When Navalny tweeted out, "We should not be a nation of frightened cowards," he urged people to conduct daily protests against the war. That hasn't happened.
Is there a level of disappointment it didn't happen? Perhaps, yes, they have it. Do I understand and get completely why it hasn't happened? Also, yes. And I would never, ever dare to blame Russian people for not going into the streets right now, because I understand the level of risk involved into this.
Do you think some Russians might listen to this interview and wonder whether you have not become, in a highly nationalistic atmosphere in Russia right now, worry whether you have become a puppet for Russia's enemies? We're in London. There are allegations that the foundation over years has taken money from Western interests. I think Russia Today recently pointed out that your contributions through cryptocurrency have gone through the roof, and they say, aha, that's a means by which they hide the fact that they are being sponsored by Western governments, rich Westerners who want to do down Russia.
Just to make it very clear, we are not being sponsored by Western governments, and we have never been. And that line of argument that you're referring to, it is just pure propaganda line. If we ever were caught I don't know, dealing with foreign governments or anything like that in some sort of dodgy way, that would be all over Russian TV.
So where do you get your money from?
We're entirely crowdfunded.
But where from? From inside Russia?
From inside Russia, we have almost stopped receiving any donation, apart from actually cryptocurrency, because it's too dangerous. We don't want to expose our Russian donors to these risks. We are an extremist organization. We are on the same list with Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. So giving us money directly right now is not a good idea. But we have had time to reroute our fundraising a little bit to diasporas, to Russian people who live abroad, to Russian people who have foreign bank accounts, because that solves the problem. That's not reachable for the Russian authorities. And also we use some crowdfunding platforms that also make you untraceable in terms of where the payment comes from.
You are Russian.
Yes.
Do you worry that in the current climate, with everything that's going on with the Ukraine war, there's a danger that some in the United States and Europe and the West are becoming anti-Russian rather than anti-Putin? Yes,
it's a big problem. And every time I see it, I feel very upset and I feel very concerned, because I don't think that there is a concept of collective responsibility.
Don't you? No. See, I had a very interesting interview with the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent recently, Olga Rudenko, and she said, listen, Russians aren't a normal nation who got lost and turned the wrong way. No, they turned the wrong way many times until the country became finally what it is today, a fascist society, a mix of aggressors and their apathetic accomplices. When you hear Ukrainians say that this isn't a Putin problem, this is a Russia problem, do you think they're wrong?
I understand why they're saying this. I understand where the Ukrainians are at the moment and this war and what's happening with their country, what's Russia doing to their country is heartbreaking, and it's probably the biggest catastrophe that happened in the world in a very long time. I would understand every emotion that they feel towards the Russians right now, and I understand how it's possible.
But her point really is that the governance you have in Russia couldn't happen in Ukraine, because Ukraine does not have this sort of latent, deep desire for strongman rule that she thinks is part of what Russia is.
I think this is a very shallow understanding of what Russia is.
Well, if it's shallow, you explain to me as a last question, how is Russia going to change and convince people like her that it can change?
I won't be able to give you a timeline, and I won't be able to give you step-by-step guides. You know, this is what's going to happen in February, this is what's going to happen in May or in June. We know and we've seen how it works. Do you remember how forever Soviet Union seemed? How it seems indestructible and how engaged people were into building socialism, etc., etc. And it collapsed overnight. These very strong regimes that are led by like one person, one dictator like Vladimir Putin, they seem to be strong when you look at them, but the point is that they can break and crumble overnight.
But is it your contention that it's not the palace coup we should look to, but people power? Because we don't see it right now.
Okay, well, I don't know. We can spend a lot of time assigning probabilities to this scenario. So is it going to be palace coup, or is it going to be revolution, or is Putin simply going to die tomorrow, which is also possible. It's not a constructive way to spend your time. A constructive way to spend your time is trying to break through Russian propaganda, try to educate the Russian population, try to talk about the war, about what's happening, spreading the truth, etc., etc. That's the way we deal with it.
And we, I'm afraid, have to end there. But Maria Pevчих, it's been a pleasure having you on Hard Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.